Hello, and welcome to the first Tech and Racial Equity Conference, Anti-Racist Technologies for a Just Future. I'm Lucy Bernholz, Director of the Digital Civil Society Lab, and we're proud to be co-hosts of this conference along with Stanford Center on Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity and the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. We're going to start by acknowledging Stanford's place on the ancestral land of the Ohlone people with a video made by two Stanford students, Will Paisley and Aja Tukros, in partnership with Stanford Live.
Stanford sits on the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded lands of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe,
who are the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was, and continues to be, of great importance to Native people.
We recognize that every member of the community has benefited
and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land.
Consistent with our values of community and diversity,
we have a responsibility
to
acknowledge and make visible
the university's relationship to Native people.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Welcome. It's so important to acknowledge the settler colonialism that continues to affect us at home and abroad. I'm Jennifer DeVere Brody. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the faculty director of the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. This event is the culmination of many years of work on our Tech and Racial Equity project that began as a small reading group with staff at the center. We're so grateful to our collaborators, the Digital Civil Society Lab and HAI, and I want to recognize the hard work of our staff at the center led by our executive director, Dr. Daniel Murray, who's helped to transform our racial equity and tech work into such a significant initiative. So too, Rigoberto Marquez, Perlita Di Cocheo, Marcia Challoner, Bridget Algie Hewitt, Byron Bejarona, and Heidi Lopez. I also want to thank our current and past fellows, many of whom you'll meet today and tomorrow, who bring so much to the center. Lucy?
The forum is the first time we've gathered members of our joint fellowship program along with you, members of the public, together. Our aspiration is for the conversations that are about to begin to contribute to and catalyze positive anti-racist futures, to promote the design and use of technologies that deliberately and intentionally improve the lives of oppressed people. Technologies that demonstrate possibilities for societies, economies, and politics built to regenerate, not to deplete. Built for justice, not for wealth creation. Built for collective health, not individualistic convenience. Built to take us closer to an equitable and just world, not to reify existing systems. The fellowship is one way that the Digital Civil Society Lab and CCSRE act on our expansive understanding of expertise, knowledge, and influence. The fellows are extraordinary individuals working on deeply influential projects who become more than they already are by joining together in cohort and connection with one another.
Absolutely. Indeed, our monthly meetings are intellectually rich gatherings where each person's contribution is amplified and transformed. Collating such a group has already produced major changes in how we participate and think about technology with greater attention to questions of race and justice. This conference highlights some of this work and incorporates CCSRE's annual Kiva lecture. We look forward to the keynote address tomorrow by Professor Ruha Benjamin of Princeton University, whose work models how to put racial justice and technology in vital conversation to the mutual benefit of both. Here I want to thank Anne and Laura Kiva for their ongoing support of the lecture in their name. And that'll be tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific time. So now we get to welcome our first panel. It's entitled A People-centric Smart City for Racial Justice, and it's moderated by one of the members of our first cohort of Racial Equity and Technology Fellows, Renata Ávila. So we'll turn it over to her to introduce the panel, and I hope you enjoy your time over the next 2 days with us. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Stanford community and all the audience joining us tonight or today, depending on where you are. It is really a great pleasure to introduce this panel because it embeds, the speakers embed the technology we hope and the places we hope to live in. Like we wish that women, like the amazing women speaking today, will be in charge of more and more policy deployments all over the world. And why cities? I mean, you might think that the topic is a little bit of traditionally in conferences speaking about race and technology, and it's quite the opposite. Cities constitute basically the backbone and the hope of social change. 600 cities are today the backbone of world economy, and I firmly believe that a similar number of cities can be the backbone of turning this into a real change of vision on what technology should mean for a city. Cities are also the place of younger people and the places of migration and the places of transit and encounter of many cultures. Cities are also today at the core of all the buying of technologies that could be of great benefit, improving the lives of people, but could also be cages, digital cages of surveillance and control. And we will see in this panel, we will visit 3 experiences. We will start with the larger picture, the bigger picture by Francesca Bria. She is the director of the Italian Innovation Fund. And she has been like really she has dedicated the last 5 years of her life in shaping a city that it places both technology and the citizens at its core. And then we will visit, she will introduce the broader topic, and then we will visit 2 examples, one in the US and one in Europe, explaining how this tech-centric but people-centric vision for a city can transform people's lives. So without further words, I let you listen to Francesca.
Thank you very much, Renata. It's a great pleasure to be with you in this very interesting conference. My speech will be about building cities that think about people first, with the broad idea, I guess, of social justice, of ecological transition, and digital democracy. And it will be based mainly on what Europe is doing at the moment in the post-pandemic times, where it is really important to start from cities and citizens and communities to regain trust, to regain democratic control over digital technologies, but in particular to think about a new start that will transform our societies to go into a more inclusive, green, and democratic cities and societies. So I guess it will be situated mainly in the European context, my presentation. So it will be, take it as a European take on the relationship between technology, cities, and democracy within the broader scope of a Green Deal and the green transition. And obviously, as Renata said, it will be very much centered on my experience in the past 4 years as Chief Technology and Digital Innovation Officer of the City of Barcelona, where I was also coordinating a network of cities that gave rise to the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, which is backed by UN Habitat. So I will talk also about my role as UN ambassador for digital cities and digital rights, and then on some perspectives that could inform what cities are doing in the world. So then I look very much forward to the discussion after my presentation. So I think that, as Renata was saying in the introduction, cities are really an important political unit to rethink our future towards a direction of change. As I said, towards a direction that really doesn't only think about business as usual or going back to before the pandemic time, but really trying to face the big challenges that we have ahead, public health care, the green transition and the fight against climate change, the need for a more equitable society that really defeat imbalances and inequalities and differences of all kinds. So I guess a broader social justice, racial justice vision at the very core of it. And I think that on one side, also during the pandemic, we saw that cities were very much hit by the pandemic. Also, we saw a very strong relationship between the COVID-19, climate change, and the loss of biodiversity. Some economists call it the crisis of the Anthropocene that we are living in. So cities were also very much hit by social distancing, by lockdown measures, by all this transformation that we are living in. But at the same time, they continue to be a space where I think we can imagine cities as laboratories for democratic and sustainable innovations, places where we can experiment new prototypes and alternative models for our future, and then scale them up at national level and at European level, and obviously also at global level. And specifically, I think in the relationship with technology is absolutely interesting for a variety of reasons. First of all, Renata hinted to the fact that we maybe need cities and institutions that are pioneering a new approach towards democratic and sustainable digitization. I think what this means in particular, if we look at the pandemic and we look at the economic data of the pandemic, if we look at the big tech and the GAFAM during the pandemic, instead of all the other industries and all the other economic sectors very much hit by the economic recession with a negative shock, the GAFAM, so the big tech companies from the US, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and the Chinese equivalent, they had a positive shock. Their revenues increased of more than 1.1 trillion US dollars. Their market capitalization combined reached around 9 trillion US dollars at the moment. It is combined, their market value is more than the entire European stock market value. And obviously they are increasingly having market power, which is unprecedented in history, but also social power. And very much so with a strong impact, not only on economic growth, competition law, taxation, and lots of other issues, but also on questions that have to do with our democracy. And when it comes to smart cities, this is an article, I put it here last year in the Financial Times, that obviously made me quite happy because I used to be the CTO of Barcelona at the moment. And the FT wrote, we can see two models of the smart city globally. One is the big tech city, so technology first. This is the example of Toronto, where Google was very prominently involved in regenerating a part of Toronto. That used to be an industrial place, and the Google model was going to be mainly tech first, and then of course one big company that was managing all the data and the infrastructure. And this of course can have a strong impact, can deliver efficiency, but at the same time it was pushed back by a network, by popular mobilization of citizens and civil society groups that were demanding transparency, accountability, and they were asking a very, I think, simple but strong question: smart for whom and cities for whom? Are we building and designing cities for the people that live in that cities, taking into account the broader implication of what technologies and the new institution of societies that contain technologies, how they're shaped? On the other side, there is the people first Barcelona model. And it was described as a model where you start from people and their participation, so large scale citizen participation, and then you reclaim back the democratic control of digital technology and data, turning data into a common good and into a public infrastructure. So I will stress the point that when we are thinking about smart cities, it's not technology cities. It doesn't start with connectivity, data, sensors, artificial intelligence, algorithms. No, it starts with people. And it may sound, of course, this is obvious, but it's not most of the cases. And this means that we start with the big challenges, the environmental and social challenges that cities are facing: reducing inequalities, affordable housing, healthcare, sustainable mobility, the ecological transition, the creation of more green public spaces, reducing carbon emissions, and improving our democratic participation. And then, so people first, and then only after we ask, how can we govern? How can we use technology in order to tackle those questions, but governed in a more democratic and accountable way? So we avoid technological solutionism, ending up responding to technology problems, and we focus to the real question of transforming our environment. A big part of this process involves large-scale citizens' participation, integrating the collective intelligence of citizens in the decision-making process. Many cities are leading on the frontier of integrating representative democracy with a more deliberative and participatory democracy, and even some hybrid forms of direct democracy. And the majority of the experiments involve a hybrid use of digital technologies and digital platforms that enhance the participation of citizens, and then participation in communities, in neighborhoods on the ground. The example of Barcelona, obviously, Laia speaks after me, so she can also talk about what they're doing at the moment, expanding on these experiments. We built a participation platform that is called Decidi in Barcelona, which is now used in over 80 cities and 20 countries in the world. Today, this is made in Europe technology. It is open source, it's privacy enhancing, and it preserves the privacy of the citizens in the use, also in how we use the data. And this technology is now used by the European Commission and the European Parliament and the European Council for a large-scale citizen consultation on the future of Europe. And I think I stress this because it's an example of how you do a new participatory democracy process, using technology that's built with fundamental rights at its very core, and it's built in the community. So it's built from the ground up, in a small scale, civic technology first, scaled at city level, and now becoming the European platform for citizen participation. So it's an example of how we can scale these alternatives at a broader level. I think that cities are also pioneering and very advanced in showing how the zero carbon cities of the future will look like. And I think this is going to be key, in particular in the post-pandemic times, to design this energy transition, to create climate resilience, zero carbon cities, which means electrifying our mobility, making it more sustainable, shifting to renewable energy sources like solar energy, creating more green spaces, more pedestrian spaces, more bicycle lanes, really greening the city, even bringing forests and green back to the city centers. And in Europe, we have this debate talking a lot about the 15-minute cities or the 30-minute cities, which is a new urban planning concept. I moved here because Barcelona shows it very nicely. This even was conceived in the urban planning process in Barcelona a long time ago by a planner like Cerdà. It was realized in the last years by the City Council of Barcelona. Is this idea of having super blocks where we remove the cars from the city centers, regaining 60% of public space that today has become citizen space, and having the cars that can only circulate around those blocks. Many cities are trying different things. Milan is doing their own thing, like bringing 100,000 trees into the center of the city. Paris is taking the 15-minute cities as the model of the city, but also, many other cities are working around this kind of new urban planning models. I think I start with these projects because we have to realize that technologies serve the purpose of realizing, better housing, better mobility, better urban spaces, better quality of life for the citizen. It shouldn't be technology for the sake of technology. In order to achieve those goals, we also have to be able to transform government and make it more open, more transparent, and more collaborative. So this is something I was doing in Barcelona And this is creating ethical digital standard for cities. And in particular, I will mention two things. Now, a lot of these policies became the groundwork for the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, where we have around 100 cities. Maybe Renata will talk a bit, and Laia will talk a little bit more about that later on. But I think it's been a quite successful coalition. And two things I want to mention. We focus a lot on creating public code, so open source code, open standards, interoperability, and open platforms that have open knowledge and that produce open knowledge and open licensing, so that solutions that are built in one cities can be reproduced and readapted in other cities. I think this is very important. Public money, public code. And then we have been doing something very innovative when it comes to procurement, which now is being really expanded by the team in Barcelona. So we introduced data sovereignty clauses in procurement contracts. What this means is that all the time that you procure something, I mean, this is what governments do. We procure technology and services with citizens' money. And we inserted clauses that would mandate any providers that win the public bids to transfer back the data to the city hall in machine readable format. So it can be consumed by artificial intelligence agencies and artificial intelligence engines. And this data can be used to do predictive modeling and data-driven policies in the city. So the data in this, so we call it data sovereignty for citizens, like a new deal on data. So this data become a public good, a public infrastructure that can create public value. Obviously, the data is the raw material of the digital economy, but many economists talk about data extractivism as the business model of digital platforms. So you see the GAFAM companies, which are the only one able to extract all this data, centralize the data centers, and then, build these AI systems and these predictive models based on our data and our behaviors. Shoshana Zuboff at Harvard Business School, she talks about surveillance capitalism. And under surveillance capitalism, you are not the customer or even the product. You are the raw material. You meaning us, producing our data with our activities, moving around the city, with our mobile phones, with our personal data. So there is also a need for strong public engagement in order to move away from a black box society. And many experts are today saying to governments that we need to end black box algorithms in governments, because we have to be very aware of the social, ethical, racial, and geopolitical implications of automated decision systems. And, which goes from the non-renewable materials that we use to workers' exploitations, to racial profiling, to any kind of discrimination, gender-based or socioeconomic discrimination that come with a higher price. So many of us don't know it. This is the hidden cost, let's say the negative externalities of this business model, which is based on actually, aggregating and monetizing and manipulating all this kind of data. I think there is also a very important issue here. Now that we are moving into the so-called gig economy, the platform economy, the sharing economy, call it as you want, you have a lot of these platforms like Airbnb, Uber, but today in the pandemics, we have a booming of Deliveroo and food delivery services of all kinds. And those algorithms are affecting very basic things like house pricing in cities. So the rent is going up. So many citizens cannot anymore afford to pay the rent in the city center. They are being expelled by the city center. So the business model really affects affordable housing policy in cities. But also algorithms have a very strong impact on labor condition of the gig workers. So many of them are not even considered employees. They are considered freelancers, and they have a very precarious labor condition. So policymakers are starting to demand verificability and access to those algorithms in order to make sure that we can control and monitor as a society the implication of algorithms. We call this algorithmic regulation, to make it fair and to redistribute the value that we are creating in this digital economy to everybody, to the whole society, to all citizens and workers. So we've been calling this a kind of new deal on data seen as a digital public good, and, putting in place open standards, data sovereignty, data portability, new governance models such as data trust, but also practical framework to assess automated decision system and to ensure accountability. Just quickly, because I think I'm really running late, I think. So this is like the Barcelona kind of Internet of Things platform. It's very interesting how you realize that, you have a fiber network, then you have a sensor network on top, then you have a kind of the data center, and then you have an ontology that describes all the data when it comes to energy monitoring, noise, parking, garbage, water management. So you start having this kind of urban operating system, but it's really important how the data is kept, how the data is managed, and how the data can be mobilized for the public good. So in Barcelona, we did one experiment. My slide is not moving anymore, which is great. Anyways, we did one experiment that's called the Decode project, and the Decode is now being tested in other cities across Europe. Actually, in Germany, we now have a big experiment, and this is creating a decentralized, privacy-enhancing data infrastructure for data sovereignty. So let's say we bet on a model where we don't see only two possible futures for the digital society: the big tech, like Silicon Valley surveillance capitalism on one side, and the big state, kind of authoritarian digital model like the one we are seeing in China. But we bet on a model where data is governed by citizens in a democratic way. So citizens can decide what data they want to keep private, what data they want to share, with whom, and for what, on what terms, for what purpose. And so if you share this data, keeping privacy as a human right, with cryptography, with advanced cryptography, with decentralized infrastructure, then you can share this data for the common good to create public value. And then use this data to improve services in the city, to create better jobs, and to improve the life of citizens. And this is the kind of data commons. This is now a vision that is driving the European approach to digital strategy. And we are putting in place a big project. It's called Gaia X, to regain a bit more of data sovereignty for Europeans, and also setting what we call the gold standard for data security, interoperability, and data rights. And obviously, the GDPR, which is, I think it can become the e-privacy standard, not only for Europe, but generally, because it protects the rights, the digital rights of citizens and the rights over data. I will end because this is a bit too much, but just saying that once you deploy all these infrastructures, now we're talking about 5G, quantum computing, supercomputing, cities are actually becoming a lab for experimentation in advanced technologies of all kinds. For me, two important things there. One, it's important to experiment with what it is the value for people. What is the better services that we can build, how we can make sure that we take into account the social justice, the racial justice, inequalities of all kinds, education, access to the infrastructures as a human right, and so on. But then also mix the kind of arts, science and technology with arts and creativity. This is a big project in Europe. We have the new European Bauhaus that is creating, let's say, a model to couple the European Green Deal, which is our ecological transition strategy, with arts, culture, new forms of architecture, and thinking about new materials that are compatible, sustainable, and can lead us to this kind of net zero strategy. So I'm closing saying only the last two things. The first thing is that obviously we cannot achieve all this vision of a more just, digital and sustainable city if you don't think about skills and empowerment, and in particular the gender gap, which is huge. In my country, in Italy, is even below 20% the participation of women in STEM, and I think we have to expand, participation of girls in STEM, and combine it with humanities, and really push forward new curriculum in school, and enhance the capacity and visibility of women in the technology industry, in academia, in society at large. So women in tech, and make strong the participation of women, and then of course deploying digital skills and education throughout society. Finally, this work of cities, I think, is very important because cities act in a network. Cities are very strong in a diplomatic global network. And this is the Cities Coalition Alliance for Digital Rights that it was initiated by Barcelona, New York, and Amsterdam. Now there are around 100 cities coming together from the global south to the global north to propose an agenda that puts digital rights first, universal and equal access to the internet, digital literacy, privacy, data protection and security, transparency, accountability, and non-discrimination of data and algorithms, participatory democracy, diversity and inclusion, and open and ethical service digital standards. I think this is a great starting point for enlarging this kind of agenda and adapting, of course, to the local need to build, a network of digital, green, and more just cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. And do not go, please. Do not go, because we have some questions for you. Personally, Francesca is a close friend and collaborator, and we lived our last pre-pandemic adventure together in this gathering with cities, and she really opened my eyes to the possibilities that through UN Habitat, for example, and through other coalitions, the possibilities that cities open for the work that we are doing here in the center, and that many of activists are doing on the ground. For those who probably do not know, Francesca is not only an economist and an academic, but she, in the past, she was and she still is a very active person in the social, racial, and gender justice movements. So that's why I think that these questions will be quite easy for her to answer. Because one of the questions, and I think that is one of the things that we have been brainstorming about for a long time, is when you have these mass participatory exercises, in a city with a large middle class, is easy, kind of. I mean, people can afford the time, can afford to have connected, can afford the infrastructure, and they can make it happen because a lot of people participate. But what happens when how do you solve the problem in a city with mass inequalities? How do you bring mass participation? Are you familiar with any example of, for example, DCSL being deployed in a country or in a place where these large inequalities exist? And do you know of any tactics to include the traditionally excluded?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question. Yes, I do know of, well, first of all, just let me say that inequalities also exist at the very core of very rich cities in the West. So we have seen lots of issues with how, unequal they can be, big, rich cities. And you always have to take into account inequality and inclusion when you do participatory processes. I think there are a couple of things. So first of all, I was very surprised when I look at the data of participatory processes with the Decidim platform, because at the beginning I thought this is just going to be for digital natives that like to be on their phone, that can participate digitally. So I want to make clear that this is not how it works. First of all, the data show that we have a lot of people participating also beyond 60 years old, so older people also. And also, this is not Facebook democracy. I mean, it's not like you click here, you solve everything, and it's not we manipulate your data. It's really a hybrid process where physical participation, the people engagement where they live in their neighborhood, in changing their community, it's what matters. And the digital part is just enhancing this participation, which is happening on the ground. So it's important to say that this is not just a digital process. And then I think another important thing is that obviously you don't start from anything that has to do with the technology, but you start, I think, engaging exactly where the problems are. So if you want to be inclusive, you involve neighborhoods which are more like people that are disenfranchised, that have less means, which are in worse socioeconomic condition, and you give the possibility to interact, first of all, with the public. So I think there is a big question of public trust, which has to be rebuilt. Obviously, if you also work with more marginalized communities, you will find that they trust less, the governments or public institutions. Maybe you have to start, obviously, if you do these participation processes because you want to change the relationship between citizens and the public institutions, and make the public institution change, not only the citizens. So make the public institutions more open, more transparent, more accountable, more that work for the people. And then you have to be involving people on things that matter to them. So I guess, if you like better employment, better living condition. For example, affordable housing was a big topic in Barcelona. Many things happened around affordable housing that was also for the kind of more marginalized communities. They didn't have access to housing. If you're talking about climate, you want a just transition, right? I mean, who is going to pay for the transition? So you also want to include citizens that really risk to be paying the highest price. So I guess it's really about designing and building the process, putting these questions about inclusion and differences at the very center. So I do think that it can work, and I think that participatory process is actually sometimes communities which are at the core. If they experience strongly the problem, they are active in participating, but maybe not manage to communicate, or they don't find the right responses from the institutional side. So I think it comes a little bit both ways.
Thank you so much, Francesca. And we understand that you have to go, but it's amazing. You are leaving us with a lot of ideas and questions for our next participants. And we hope that this is your first, but we hope it will not be your last, visit to the center. Hopefully the next one will be physical.
Thanks so much, Renata. Have a great continuation of the conference. Thank you.
Yes. Before we continue, I want to mention and send a big hug to Tawana Petty, who was supposed to be here today, and she's not, but she's watching. We hope we send her a big hug, because she's one, together with Elizabeth, one of the champions transforming the interaction and taking back the democratic aspects of technology in cities. And our next speaker is my co-fellow, Elizabeth Adams. She's an author, a thinker, a futurist. I mean, she's so many things, and she is one of the responsibles for innovating and transforming from the inside the rules of cities, making cities, in this case, making the city of Minneapolis a city that is people-centric and that transform from the inside and from the outside the relationship with technology. She is currently the chief AI ethics advisor of Paravision. She's also advisor to the United Nations on AI. And she's also part of the center. She's one of the Race and Tech Fellows at Stanford Stanford CCSRE and PAX. So Elizabeth, tell us, how did you manage to transform in less than 12 months such a massive things such as technology in the city of Minneapolis?
Well, first off, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And I hope that I can answer that question by the time we get through my presentation. But as Renata said, I'm Elizabeth Adams. I bring you greetings from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm thrilled to be here to share a bit of my work, my research that has been a big part of my life as a Race and Tech Practitioner Fellow. But I must thank Professor Brody and Lucy and the entire Stanford team for an outstanding fellowship experience and for the support to explore what a more fair and equitable city could look like as a tech transparency lens is placed on racial equity challenges in the city of Minneapolis. So let's get started. So the Civic Tech Initiative I worked on for the past year is called POSTME, Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology and Military Equipment. So just a little bit about me before I talk about POSTME. So I've been researching and working in the AI ethics space for the past 4 years, but I've been a technologist for over 20, and I've led large-scale technology teams for the government. And in one of my roles, I ran a systems integration lab with over 200 technologists. And the goal of this program was to decide very quickly if the technology that was being developed, purchased, and or customized aligned with our chief goal of keeping people safe. And I say that because not only do I have the actual experience of setting up teams of engineers and software developers and modeling and simulation experts with a goal of designing safe technology, but I also have seen the consequences of what happens when tech design is not human-centric, which is partly what drives my interest in this work. So I am a founding member of POSTME Coalition, which is a local measure within the ACLU CCOPS effort. And we formed this coalition early last year to work on advocating for transparency, oversight, accountability, and equity in the use of technology by the city of Minneapolis. And following the murder of George Floyd here in Minneapolis, our work with PostMe particularly became motivated by an urging for accountability in how law enforcement uses AI-enabled tools at their disposal. So PostMe does not come from a place of technophobia, but rather our coalition is about embracing technology proactively so that when these tools are thought of or procured or even implemented, communities have shared decision-making in the use of these tools to ensure that they are being used responsibly and not used to target certain populations. So after speaking with a number of adjacent cities doing similar work, we included these types of surveillance technologies in our initial ordinances. Computer vision, and of course, we've heard a lot about facial recognition challenges, gait recognition, which is the way that systems can tell how you walk, your own unique walk pattern. Location tracking, drones and aerial surveillance are really popular now, as well as Amazon rings. And then biometric surveillance. And one thing I want to call out is the heartbeat lasers, which is the ability to tell your unique heartbeat. Some additional considerations that we included were energy consumptions and smart grid surveillance. And we learned that in our city, there were a number of landlords who were interested in being able to tell how many people were in a particular residence based on how many people signed the lease. So all of these tools are now available to law enforcement who use them to augment their work. But I'd like to invite you to consider a critical piece of work that is often missed when discussing the impacts of surveillance technologies on communities. And it happens during the technology and product lifecycle in corporations all over the world. And it's the space where proactive, shared leadership, stakeholder influence, and opportunities sit. And I've already shared my background, which includes leading technology teams. And so when you get to work on something cool and futuristic, there is a sense of pride. People are excited about working on the next technological advancements. So before a technology starts, there's an approval process. There's budgets approved, leaders are assigned, requirements and concept sessions happen, the development through the execution process happens, and new versioning. There are also many hands that are a part of the approval phase before it makes it to the next phase. And at this point, there are many discussions that are happening, as well as additional stakeholders such as marketing, sales, and customer service. So when you get to a point in the product lifecycle for it to be ready to make it to the market, someone has already said we are satisfied with the results. But what happens when our technology worlds and our social worlds collide? All of this work, time, money allocated to what seems to be an exciting initiative to advance technology, only to end up with what happened on the right. Only for this technology to end up in society where a community unites to advocate for its ban. But what was missed? Well, the biggest impact from our PostMe work happened on February 12th of this year, with the Minneapolis City Council voting to ban facial recognition technology. Now, this is a huge community lift. So there are many stories behind the headlines. And before you can even get to a city council passing proposed legislation, there's a different kind of development happening, advocacy development, the process that's happening, which includes coalition building, educating the community and policymakers, as well as understanding the legislation process. But for me, the question is about why. Why should residents in a city have to take up the mantle to advocate for a ban on technology? What is it about certain technologies and their use that cause communities to unite and work together to advocate? Could the missing link be inclusive tech and humane engineering? The opportunity where the inclusion of the community experience is non-negotiable in how technology is developed, how it's sold, and used in cities across the world. Because in order to do this advocacy work, communities are taking away time from their lives to pursue these initiatives. Now they are faced with trade-offs. Do I prioritize enjoying my life experiences with friends and family, such as golfing, sailing, library visits, or travel? Or do I advocate for protections that should be a basic human right, safe technology? This is what I consider an additional tax, and even perhaps a trauma tax, to have to fight for one more thing that is levied against you. So here's why communities are advocating. And as part of our research for PostMe, we looked into various computer vision models to see if we could show any errors in predictive labeling. And in this computer vision example, we used Google Vision AI. And in both pictures, a temperature is being taken with an infrared thermometer. But with the image on the left of the lighter skinned person and the lighter skinned hand, the algorithm predicts one set of labels, 68% probability that the image includes technology. But with the image on the right, with the darker skinned person and the darker skinned hand, the algorithm predicts the photo as having a gun with an 88% probability that the image doesn't indeed contain a gun. So this has happened because there is a lack of diversity in the training data. The training data does not include an equal mix of ethnicities, genders, and ages and skin tones, as well as associations. But let's take this one step further. In this example, one of our coalition members lightened the image to see if the prediction would change. And as you can see, it did indeed change. Once the image was lightened, the gun was not predicted. What was predicted instead was a hand. So when you see these things I'm showing you, I want you to keep in the forefront of your mind that because of the absence of some sort of AI ethics, standards, processes, policies, and values that govern product development, and because these tools are being used by law enforcement around the world, everyday citizens are doing the work of calling these out. And the impacts to communities of color and vulnerable populations is great. I want to make this a bit more personal. So let's talk about other use cases as we move into thinking about the use of technology in smart cities, which allow for different kinds of experiences. Maybe we will move into different experiences with museums that highlight the history and achievements of some of our icons. Or we may begin using immersive meeting spaces at libraries or studying spaces at libraries with avatars. Or maybe we will begin to enjoy outdoor activities with exercise equipment. These are just a few considerations. So in this first example, I took 3 icons in the Black community: Maya Angelou, Cicely Tyson, and Shirley Chisholm. And I ran their pictures through an AI app that is supposed to show us what an image would look like as a portrait. And I also ran my photo as well. And the results have returned all of us as white women. Basically a total erasure of our look, our image, and our likeness. And again, let's think about all of this that happened as a product makes its way into the market to be sold. In the next example, I was invited to participate in an immersive office experience. You create an avatar and you go in and you do work with your colleagues in this immersive experience through an Oculus headset. And these images are what my avatar looked like. Now, I was initially excited because of the marketing materials that were approved for this particular technology. And I ended up meeting with the company and was told that they did not have the budget to create a more diverse and realistic looking avatar for darker skin. And I took this as an opportunity to learn more about the company and their philosophy on design and inclusive design. And I asked them if they had a diverse staff or if they used a diverse user group when testing. And the answer was not only no, but it wasn't a priority. And finally, during lockdown here in Minnesota, due to COVID, I purchased a bike similar to a Peloton. And in order to access the classes, you have to choose an avatar. Well, none of these look like me. So I reached out to the company via their private Facebook support group, and I was trolled. I was told by other users that my priorities were in the wrong place, and why couldn't I just pick one of the avatars? So let's think about, again, what our experience will be like in the future as cities are looking to purchase smart tools and apps from businesses to offer a different experience for residents. Smart cities are not just about surveillance. They also take into account all of the ways that we will begin to interact with society. So from facial recognition to predictive analytics to avatars, you can see the various ways that inclusive tech should be non-negotiable, because these products not only have the potential to cause great harm, such as in facial recognition technology or predictive analytics, But there's also exclusion in the ability to participate and interact with some of these technologies as a society. So what does this have to do with smart cities? A lot. We must draw connections between technology and how they should be developed, sold, and used with a human-centric and inclusive lens, especially when discussing how technology will be used in cities moving forward. I know that we have a long way, but not an impossible way to go before we can address technology in an integrated way as we look to the future. So this is a screenshot of the Minneapolis 2040 page for policies that support various 2040 topics. There has been a very comprehensive study and research effort around what Minneapolis could look like and should look like in 2040. So MSP 24 sets the direction for the region's growth and development. Local communities are served by regional systems, which include housing and transportation and wastewater collection, et cetera. And I haven't dug enough into this to see if there is an integrated plan that shows how technology should be considered. I suppose not, because I've been involved in the effort to bring awareness to this consideration as an appointee to the Minneapolis's Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee. However, I am encouraged by this transparency from the city in its 2040 plan, and I'm hopeful that that communities will still contribute to the plans and policies which will govern the city over the next several years. So as we wrap up this session, I just want to highlight these trends based on my research in AI and ethics, research I've done over the past 4 years. But what I really want to highlight is the need for partnerships and representation. Because until we drive a technology priority that is inclusive of diverse perspectives and experiences and drive priorities inclusive of various communities, we will continue to find ourselves on the outskirts of life-saving innovations and protections. Technology should be bringing us together, not drawing us further apart, and we need to embrace it. So what's next? I'll share a few things that I think. Partnerships. We need solutions that support businesses, governments, academia, and society interacting together in ways that allow us to advance and thrive. The space for what's wrong is very, very crowded. We need community involvement in our fusion centers and our command centers. We need to start asking how we can use technology to bring us together. How can we get to thriving? Equity. As I'm seeing more and more interest in partnerships, we need equity, not just a seat at the table to discuss the challenges, but we need to pay community members for their time for helping to contribute to a more fair and trustworthy society. We also need to listen and then act. Listen and then act. Communities will tell you exactly what we need. And as a technologist, my mind immediately goes to the how. We need to listen and then act. There's a very interesting group in Amsterdam called the Living Labs. The Living Labs provides a co-innovative process which multiple stakeholders jointly test, develop, and create metropolitan solutions. And through this experience, groups work together on iterative development of innovations in real life scenarios. And because of this, the adoption is strengthened by involving all stakeholders from an early stage. And I've been talking with them about the kinds of things that can be done here in Minneapolis. Because as a technologist, the goal is agile development, to work in sprints by developing a minimum viable product. You want a car, deliver a skateboard first, then a bike, then a motorcycle, then a car. This is why technology is outpacing community and government involvement. So again, I'm hoping that by seeing some of these creative ways to build partnerships, that we can adopt co-creation, shared leadership, shared decision-making in our own cities to deliver solutions which make our communities and our planets stronger. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Renata.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I mean, I learned a lot, and I think that our audience is, I'm seeing all the reactions, and everybody is so happy and receiving very well this. Instead of jumping directly to the questions this time, we will listen to the case of one mayor in power, like the deputy mayor of Barcelona right now, And then the two of you will answer the question. So we will have next Laia Bonet, who's the deputy mayor of the city of Barcelona. We have a lot of Barcelona today, but it's never enough Barcelona, and it's great to learn from the experiences of such innovative place. And she will tell us of the right now as one of the mayors who was in charge of managing this very, very, very difficult time, but also a mayor, a deputy mayor with a vision to the future. She will also share and unveil the future plans. Over to you, Laia.
Thank you, Renata. Good morning and good afternoon from Barcelona. And thank you for the invitation to take part in this excellent panel. I'm really happy to share this stage with you, Elizabeth and Francesca. After their intervention, what I will do is to provide an idea of what we in Barcelona are doing to build a human-centered digital city, departing from the effects that the COVID crisis had on digitalization. And then I will also explain how this is related to our international action. And I will share with you some more details about the International Observatory on Urban AI, a project that we are just starting and which I am really happy to present here. Let me start by providing a brief overview of Barcelona. Barcelona is the second city in Spain and the fifth largest metropolitan area in the European Union. It has a population of 3.2 million inhabitants, which makes it a large city in Europe, but a somewhat small one on the global stage. As you may know, Spain is organized around three levels of governments: the national, the regional, and the local level. And Barcelona has a city council directly elected, which in turn elects the mayor and the city government that I represent here today. We, as a city, are an autonomous level of government and have important responsibilities over urban planning, housing, social services, mobility, infrastructure, and economic development, among others. Over the years, we have also developed policy action on areas that concern us, and digital policy is clearly one of them. This has only increased during the last year. Because let us be clear, in 2020, going digital has become essential to avoid the worst economic and social effects of the COVID crisis. Digital tools have ensured the continuity of municipal services and have opened up new business opportunities in a context of economic devastation. As a matter of fact, during the first semester of 2020, the ICT sector was the only one in Barcelona actually creating jobs. Remote work and learning digital platforms have protected workers from being exposed to COVID in their workplaces and schools. In Barcelona, however, there is evidence that the pandemic has affected poorer districts disproportionately. Poor housing conditions and physical work models have caused a higher infection and mortality rate in neighborhoods that were already worse off. The socioeconomic crisis is also hitting low-income communities, women, and informal workers harder. In Barcelona, for instance, there is a large difference in the increase of the unemployment rate between the lowest income neighborhoods and wealthier areas. Digital inequalities, the digital divide, grows along the lines of these urban inequalities. We have the data on what such inequalities mean, because we carried out a survey during the second half of 2020 to know exactly the dimension of the challenge. The results of this survey show that 92% of households have access to internet. And for a large majority of them, it is provided through fiber optic. For the remaining 8%, the causes are diverse, including personal choice, age, and other factors. But still, there is one figure that is extremely worrying. 1% of the city's population does not have home-based connection to internet due to the lack of sufficient economic resources. 1% may seem a good figure, But the reality is that in absolute terms, this means around 10,000 families suffering from digital poverty. I was talking about access to internet, but when it comes to benefiting from digitalization, there are two other factors that matter. The devices available to access and use internet, and having the skills to get the most out of its usage. As you can imagine, socioeconomic inequalities shape digital inclusion by conditioning the number and type of available devices, as well as the skills to use internet. In Barcelona, such inequalities are clear. Higher income households tend to have more devices than lower income families. But it is not only a matter of quantity. The quality of such devices is even more important. And there we saw that devices in higher income families tend to be laptops, whereas lower incomes have a larger predominance of smartphones. Of course, this has had consequences over the last year, during which 62% of Barcelona's residents have increased the range of activities they do online. Remote work, electronic administrative procedures, and online education are the main usages that grew during 2020. And so at a time when such online uses have become necessary for our daily lives, then device quality becomes crucial. The trend, however, also shows disparities among social groups. Older, less educated, unemployed population segments use less internet and for a less diverse range of usages than younger people, students, people with higher education levels, and employed populations. And it has all resulted, for instance, in 6.5% of students not being able to follow online education due to socioeconomic reasons. So if our enjoyment of human rights to decent work, to quality education, gender equality, access to public services is defined by access to the internet and having the skills to use it, we need to ensure that the digital transition is just and inclusive. This is why, in addition to the emergency plan that we set up in the early month of the pandemic, in September, we will be launching a pilot policy on digital inclusion. And this pilot will identify families that are affected by the digital divide in terms of lack of access to internet, devices, and skills to use it. And this will take place as an experiment in the policy sense of the term, aimed at assessing whether providing access to internet and devices to families is enough to overcome the digital divide, or whether further support is needed. Some of these families will be provided with internet access and laptops without training, and some of the families will also get digital training. We will also create and develop a catalog of resources for digital training that will be provided to beneficiaries by digital trainings. And to ensure that we can really measure the impact of such policies, we will develop and apply a robust set of ex-ante and ex-post assessment indicators that will help us track our success in bridging the digital divide. So if we talk about people-centered smart cities for racial justice, the first thing we need to do is to make sure that the basic infrastructure of digitalization, that means internet, works for everyone. In other words, we cannot let digitalization grow into a new layer of inequalities in our cities. But of course, there are other pillars for a just transition. A second one builds around who develops technology and makes decisions about it, and that refers to gender inequalities. In Barcelona, disparities are way too clear. Women only represent 26% of the jobs in the tech sector, and only 8.6% of software developers are women. This is hugely problematic, as you can imagine. We will not be able to have gender-sensitive tech if women are not involved. We want to reverse this situation, and therefore we have set up a municipal strategy to promote digital capacity building for women and increase their access to the technological labor market. To provide also visibility to women in the tech sector in Barcelona, and last but not least, to facilitate girls' access to tech-related studies and careers. As such, the first thing that we have started to do is to set up a municipal capacity building program for vulnerable women to get trained as full-stack developers. And we have partnered with local companies to ensure that the first class of this program will get job opportunities after graduation. So Barcelona is investing in a first pillar, as I said, which is digital inclusion, a second pillar, which is gender equality in technology, and a third pillar, which of course relates to emergent technology, and more specifically to artificial intelligence. The Barcelona city government has so far developed very few AI systems focused on non-risky activities such as the thematic classification of administrative procedures in the city council. But we all know that there are other activities that may be far riskier for our fundamental rights and also for social justice. We have plenty of examples of failed AI systems applied to public services that have resulted in rights being violated. So it is clear that we will soon start to scale up the use of AI systems in municipal services because it indeed offers opportunities in terms of inclusion and efficiency. But before that, we need to lay the basis for an ethical municipal model of AI. That's why last month we presented our municipal strategy for a trustworthy model of algorithms and data. What do we want to ensure with it? First, we want to ensure democratic monitoring of AI by public institutions and citizens. Second, we will aim for full transparency and auditability of both the algorithmic models and the databases they are applied on to make sure they follow human rights and public interest criteria. And finally, we will establish a clear liability regime for any harm or loss that may arise from the creation and use of AI-based solutions. This means that the City Council must explain the origins of the data and carry out assessments to mitigate their biases. On the other hand, the requirements must be met for guaranteeing smart systems based on high-quality data sets. In other words, biases, inaccuracies, errors, and mistakes must be kept to a minimum. And all this needs to be dealt with before training a smart system with any data sets. Not only this, algorithms and data from municipal AI systems must be able to be audited anytime. And to do so, an advisory board will be created, made up of expert and civil society representatives on AI ethics and digital rights. And this board will be tasked with assisting and advising the City Council on AI uses for the common good, and with supervising the AI systems applied to municipal systems. This is what we are doing on AI, but let's not fool ourselves. As has been mentioned already, we understand that there are huge constraints to the technological model that we want for our cities. Constraints that come from European regulations, from our own capacities, from the technology the private sector develops, from the global debates on digitalization, and so on. What we are doing is to build alliances at different levels to try to influence all these factors that limit our action so that they are as much aligned with our own ambitions as possible. And how can we do that? Well, first, we recognize that we are a European city and that our laws on digitalization and technology are increasingly shaped by European Union law. What we are doing in that sense is working with most of the largest cities in Europe within the network Eurocities to define joint positions towards European legislation and effectively advocate for it. For instance, a month ago, the European Commission presented its proposal for a European regulation of AI, and this will need to be discussed both at the European Parliament and among member states. But what we did was to issue a clear stance on behalf of the European cities with three main messages. First, we want an outright ban on mass biometric surveillance systems, rather than keeping some possibilities open as the proposed legislation does. Second, we want independent authorities to validate whether AI systems provided by private companies comply with ethical standards, rather than promoting self-assessment mechanisms, which makes no sense in terms of upholding an ethical model of AI. And third, we are saying that cities need to be part of the European board that will define how strict ethical standards should be for different AI systems. So that was just to provide you with an example of the sort of work that we do at the European level. But we also acknowledge that Europe operates in a global context and that there are cities across the world with which we share similar challenges and also similar aspirations when it comes to technology. This is why in 2018, Barcelona, Amsterdam, and New York set up the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, which Francesca knows firsthand. And let me just take a moment here to highlight something. Barcelona, Amsterdam, New York, but also Milan, Los Angeles, Berlin, Stockholm, Montreal, Glasgow, Atlanta. We all have women mayors or deputy mayors responsible for digital policies. I don't think this is a coincidence. I think that there is a true concern from cities with feminist leaderships to make sure that we build a technological model based on rights. And this true concern brings about an active leadership that is committed to show that another digitalization is possible. But I was talking about the coalition. So the coalition now has 50 members, as well as the partnership of UN Habitat and City Networks, the City Networks Eurocities and UCLG. And member cities are mainly from Europe and Northern America, although we are now working to ensure better representation from Latin America, Asia, and also from Africa. The coalition is basically a platform for technical exchange, as well as for advocating for a rights-based model of digitalization. Just two examples of what the coalition is doing currently. The first was focused on providing recommendation on tracing apps. As you know, national governments and tech companies across the world started to advocate for digital apps that trace contacts among potentially COVID-positive people. But we were concerned about a number of things. First, we said that contact tracing apps could not replace epidemiological measures related to public health. They needed to be seen as supplementary to a comprehensive approach that included large-scale testing, social distancing, manual contact tracing, vaccine development, and so on. Second, we were concerned about the need to respect the privacy of citizens, and therefore we called on anonymity, transparency, but also control regarding data collected to be ensured. And third, we were concerned about the impact of the digital divide on the inequality effects of this app. In Barcelona, for instance, access to smartphones is very high on average, but there is a segment of our elderly, especially those who live in low-income neighborhoods, that do not have one. And we all needed to be mindful of this. This is why back in May, with the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, we issued a set of recommendations to guide governments and big tech's development and application of contact tracing apps. The second example refers to the creation of a digital rights help desk. This is a pilot project in which the coalition will mobilize both city officers and independent experts, and the help desk will provide opportunities for capacity building, direct support to cities in setting up digital rights frameworks. Thus, we have more legislative work at the European level, as you can see, and a more technical exchange at the global level. But we still felt that we were lacking a systematic work to map what cities are doing on artificial intelligence and how do city governments contribute to build a rights-based model of AI. That is why we are setting up the International Observatory of Urban AI. This observatory builds on a concrete reality, which is that many cities have already started to develop and implement their own AI strategies aiming for an ethical deployment. I have already told you about our strategy in Barcelona, but there are many other cases. Amsterdam, for example, or Helsinki already have a municipal register of algorithms up and running in which you can find detailed information about the AI systems used. Within the coalition, policy guidelines and tools have been developed to support member cities in their local application of AI, as I said. However, we lack systematic efforts to identify best and worst cases of AI use in urban contexts, as well as a shared understanding of what it entails to roll out an ethical AI model in a city by its local government. In this context, the Urban AI Observatory will support cities' AI policy work with evidence-based knowledge. How we will do it? The observatory will monitor the artificial intelligence regulation, development, and also the deployment in the coalition's member cities. It will produce and update policy standards for ethical AI regulations and application in cities. And it will also identify obstacles hindering the deployment of fair, transparent, and accountable AI use in urban areas. And with that, we will try to contextualize contributions from cities to global AI and technological trends. We already have a work plan for 2021, which we will have three main outputs. The first thing we will do is to analyze strategies and mechanisms implemented by city governments to deploy ethical models of artificial intelligence, and we propose an analytical framework to assess such policies. Then we will set up an online atlas of good practices in the use of ethical AI solutions to sectorial urban policies. And that means mobility, waste management, water and sanitation, tourism, and so on. And finally, we will start a conversation on facial recognition and racial justice with a dedicated thematic report on the use of facial recognition in the public space. The observatory will be led by us here in Barcelona, and will count on the partnership of the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights and UN Habitat. The project, however, is open to new partnerships, and so by addressing the Stanford community, I also wanted to invite organizations and also institutions that may be interested in collaborating in some way with the project. Feel free to contact the Barcelona team through the contact details that we will leave on the chat of this conference. With that, I know I have talked a lot, so Renata, I will finish here and revert back to you.
Thank you, Laia. I mean, you said the most exciting part of your talk in the very last minutes. I mean, it's very exciting, this AI observatory that is going to evaluate at the city level where the compliance of facial recognition technologies and racial justice, which I think in this conference, you might find the ideal partner in Elizabeth and all the work that she already did, and also Tawana Petty. And this is precisely like the idea, as it might sound so broad and so disconnected to the core of this conference, it is not. Cities are the places where most of the people, especially young people, live today. And they're part of our the interactions with the way that the city is designed have a lot to do with our everyday life. And so the transformative changes that can happen in a city and the way that we can participate in those changes is one of the motivations for us to put together this panel. And also to explain how all the magic ingredients that all the three of you shared tonight, the alliances that you can make, not only with the private sector, as Elizabeth showed, like knocking the door, even sending a message, but also with the social sector and with communities. How enabling participation, but not just the click here participation, but participation that is meaningful, physical, in the co-design of the technology can transform really racial justice. And how it should be like a policy that is contagious. How a city, developing a good plan and even good technologies, taking into consideration economic, social, gender, and racial justice can spread across. So I have shared the links to the Coalition of Cities for Digital Rights, and we have a little bit of time for some questions for Elizabeth and for you that the audience ask. I will. One is for Elizabeth, and one is for Laia. The first one for Elizabeth is, when planning a city, how do you reach all the people, especially those not in a position of privilege, so you can capture diverse voices and get the best solutions for this tech design that you're commenting in your experience in Minneapolis? How was the outreach process, and did you learn any good tip that you can share about it?
Yeah, well, that is an extremely good question. And not being a person who's responsible for all the citizens, I can only imagine the challenge that it is in reaching certain groups for certain challenges. But what I will say is, in Minneapolis, we have cultural districts. We also have passed racial equity ordinances that make sure we have a racial equity lens on all the work that the city does. The city also passed data privacy ordinances, which share in collecting data, the city has to let citizens know how they're collecting the data, why they're collecting it, and who's using it, and so forth. And we also declared racism a public health crisis. So the city has done some work in that space so that they have an understanding of what are some of the challenges around housing and education and so forth. I think where we still need work is in the technology space and understanding how societies currently interact with technology. Everyone's using a smartphone, or maybe they're not. They're interacting with it somehow. But also, just how governments have to think about the technology that they procure. So it's still a question. And in our work, we had to start from the ground up. We formed a coalition, and all the members of the coalition had networks that we reached out to the networks and shared our work. What was beautiful about it, though, was that there's this shared leadership, this shared decision-making process along with the government, so that everyone is bringing their gifts and strengths to the particular process. As I mentioned, I'm a technologist. We also have people who were policy analysts and other folks who were cybersecurity experts, and so people that were part of the cultural districts. So it's a lot of work, and I'm just going to say that, and that's why I push for equity. If you want to involve community in helping with some of these challenges, I think it's fair to include their expertise as the same level of expertise as a data scientist or an executive who's directing technology. And so I think we need some different incentives.
Thank you. And now the question for Laia is more on the super blocks policies that Francesca and you mentioned on Barcelona, and how these the divides, all the divides that you mentioned, the racial divide lines have impacted your people-centric approaches. And then a follow-up question to Elizabeth. Yeah. So.
Microphone. Our goal is that our AI regulations in Barcelona prevent any kind of discrimination. And we are also aiming for a model in which it is not only the city government who controls and assesses that AI systems do not produce unfair results. Our strategy is built around the idea of democratic control, but also at the same time, accountability and transparency, so that anyone in the city can audit them anytime. So we want a non-discriminatory model by design. The other thing we want to do, as I said, is to contribute to the global conversation on AI and race with evidence-based urban policies. And this is why we have included an output for this year's work plan of the observatory, which will assess AI systems of facial recognition applied in cities and which have resulted in racial and gender injustice. The idea is to contribute from Barcelona to this debate with other cities, obviously.
And a follow-up question on that, because this AI observatory looking at this, racial justice issues on a global level, but at the municipal level, is very exciting for our communities of study and practice. How can people join, and how can they follow this, participate with as researchers, give input, give opinions, contribute with their research and their methodologies or to the work that you're doing? How to participate and become more involved in this?
Well, for me, folks can go to postme.mn, and our group is now looking at some other opportunities for coalition building and the coalition work. And so banning facial recognition was the first part of it. There are other considerations that we're looking at the state level, as well as looking at some things within the Minneapolis school system, some algorithms that are being targeted towards children and profiling children. So our work is now branching into some other areas. So you can start by going to postme, postme.mn, if you want to learn more or get involved.
Over to you, Laia. You're muted.
Yes, I see. So we are now starting with a cities group, and we want to get this project started. But we, of course, want to create a community of practice and knowledge. So this, I think it's the main idea, that we need to create this community of practice and knowledge, and this will come at later stages that I hope that will be very soon.
Well, we have 1 minute left, and I have a question for Elizabeth, because these conversations are very not accessible for the younger ones. And I know that, Elizabeth, you have published recently a book on it, and I will love if you can share for a moment the book with the audience and show it. And she did an amazing work in creating materials to have these conversations with children. So I will give the opportunity to Elizabeth to showcase her book and tell us a little bit more about it. And after that, a couple of questions, and then we close the panel.
Well, first off, thank you. My book is called Little AI and PD, and it is a love effort. I created it initially last summer as an ebook for families who were affected by COVID, who may not have had a chance to get to the library, and they wanted to do more family things. I was inspired by this book because, believe it or not, writing short stories is how I'm able to solve very large, complex technological problems. It's just writing the stories. And so what this book does is it takes the journey of little AI who is meeting with Petey and showing Petey all these things that technology can do, and without concern for privacy. And Petey's mother is concerned that little AI has moved into the neighborhood and has suggested that the robot gets some more work done. And so the robot goes out to the larger global community so that it can be safe for families and communities. So it is on Amazon, Little AI and Petey, by Elizabeth M. Adams. So thank you, Renata, for the opportunity to share.
And the last question to Laia, but it is, you feel free to answer as well. Elizabeth, is on predictive policing. What is an AI, your opinion on predictive policing and AI, and how it does to racialize communities, the impact of it, if you have an opinion on that and any experience with it. You're muted.
Sorry, I open and close the microphone. We are from these systems in Barcelona, and I don't know what's happening with my microphone, but what I can tell is that we are calling for a ban on biometric surveillance in Europe, and this probably is the only thing that matters in terms of regulation when we talk about so important issue in Europe, obviously. But we need it. We need it in a European level.
And I'll just add, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll just add that if you think about how policing has happened in our country and the overreaching that policing has had on vulnerable populations and communities of color, now you have AI that's one more tool that they have in their toolbox. And so as I went through my presentation, there's bias all the way up in the technology life cycle that happens, that technology is sold, and then we're bringing human bias into the process, meaning by law enforcement officers. We're unsure how they were trained. We don't know if the systems are nudging them to think about certain groups and profile certain groups as being, menaces to society or whatever. And so there's a history of over-policing in our particular country. And now that we have these AI-enabled tools, and we wanted to specifically ban facial recognition technology here in Minneapolis because the Minneapolis City Department was using Clearview AI. And you can do a quick search on the absence of pure ethics in Clearview AI's work. Many large companies such as Google, YouTube, Twitter have all sent cease and desist letters. And we know that technology was being used to collect data, protesters, people who have no idea that their photos are being collected and used, like I said, to further overreach. And so it's just one more thing that creates distrust between communities and police officers. And I'm excited that the Minneapolis City Council was on board and actually voted unanimously to ban facial recognition technology here.
Thank you so much. Just I will ask both of you. First, thank you. I mean, it's amazing the work that you are doing and how complementary it is. I hope that very soon Elizabeth, Laia, and I will be like either in at Stanford or in Barcelona. Maybe all of you with the audience and enjoying some face-to-face space. In the meantime, I want each of you to leave us with a thought on how to bring racial issues into as a main topic into the city's policy, and how can we make tech work for racial justice. So if any of you, whoever wants to go first.
I can can go first because, as I mentioned, we already have racial equity, which is framed in the work that the Minneapolis City Council and how the city runs by declaring racism a public health crisis. Now there's a lens and a priority set on how businesses are done, what resources are used for housing, education, health, and so forth. And there's a whole racial equity division to look at the data around how we are doing certain things in the city. And so I'm fortunate that in Minneapolis, we already have that groundwork that's already laid, which was the basis for our coalition, was being able to use that as momentum for our work.
That's my turn. I would say that not only cities have a responsibility for that. I think that we still have a lot of work to do to continue problematizing and politicizing the current model of technology. Obviously, it is not the case of people attending fora like this one, but there is still a large lack of understanding of the implications of our current technological model for our rights as citizens. So we need to continue raising awareness and bringing this issue to the political arena and the public opinion. And here, politicians like myself have a responsibility, it's clear, but also activists of all kinds. For instance, in April, Netflix launched a documentary on the dangers of AI called Coded Bias. It provides with a very clear and understandable idea of what AI systems may mean for human rights. Well, this is also the kind of work that we need to do, which is basically educating people, because knowledge, as you know, is power. That is one thing. The other thing that we need to do, and here I refer to us as cities, is to showcase what our demands mean in practice. Basically, to develop and apply alternative technologies and regulations that render our ideas concrete and show that another model of digitalization is possible. This is what Barcelona has done over the past 6 years with participatory software like the CDIM, it has been mentioned, but also with policies like the ones I have shared with you before on digital inclusion, ethical AI, and so on. Our biggest contribution to a change of model is leading by example and providing evidence that such change is possible. So to answer directly to your question, Renata, and close my final remarks, we need to educate and to continue experimenting and innovating to show that there is an alternative. In any case, thank you very much for the opportunity to take part in this panel. And I am sure that the vision and practices that we have discussed here today will eventually prevail. And I am happy to count on your partnership to make it happen. Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And just last appeal to everybody watching this, go to your city council, question them, ask them about the technology that they are using, ask about race policies and inclusion policies on it. Be the trouble you want to see in the world. Show the Declaration of Cities for Digital Rights. Get involved with your research. Let's be active. Let's be engaged, and let's continue with this great conference.